Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched her grandfather polish his World War II medals every Sunday morning. He would tell her stories about courage, sacrifice, and what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. Those stories planted a seed in young Sarah's heart that would grow into an unshakable determination. At 18, Sarah walked into the Marine Corps' recruiting office with her head held high and her mind made up. The recruiter, a stern man with kind eyes, looked at the petite young woman standing before him. Sarah was barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed just over 100 pounds. But there was something in her eyes that told him she was serious. "Ma'am, you understand this isn't going to be easy," the recruiter said, leaning back in his chair. "Marine Corps training is designed to break you down and build you back up stronger. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Sir, I've been ready my whole life." Boot camp at Paris Island was everything the recruiter had warned her about and more. The drill instructors screamed until their voices were hoarse. The physical training pushed every recruit to their absolute limits. Sarah struggled with some of the physical challenges, but she never gave up. When other recruits fell behind on long marches, Sarah would encourage them to keep going. When someone couldn't complete their push-ups, Sarah would stay after training to help them practice. Her drill instructor, Sergeant Rodriguez, noticed Sarah's determination early on. He had seen thousands of recruits come through his training, but Sarah was different. She never complained, never made excuses, and never let anyone give up on themselves. During the hardest week of training, when half the recruits were thinking about quitting, Sarah organized study groups and helped everyone memorize the Marine Corps' history they needed to know. "Martinez," Sergeant Rodriguez called her aside one evening, "you've got something special. I've seen bigger Marines, stronger Marines, faster Marines, but I've never seen a Marine with more heart than you." Sarah graduated from boot camp in the top 10% of her class. Her grandfather, now elderly and walking with a cane, traveled from Texas to watch her graduation ceremony. As Sarah stood at attention in her dress blue uniform, tears streamed down the old man's face. 3 generations of his family had now served their country. After graduation, Sarah was assigned to Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton in California. She specialized in logistics, making sure Marines in the field had everything they needed to complete their missions. It wasn't the most glamorous job in the Corps, but Sarah understood its importance. Without proper supplies, even the best Marines couldn't do their jobs effectively. Sarah's first deployment took her to Afghanistan. The forward operating base where she was stationed was small and isolated, surrounded by mountains and desert. Every day brought new challenges. Supply convoys faced constant threats from improvised explosive devices. Helicopters carrying supplies were shot at by enemy fighters hiding in the mountains. Despite the dangers, Sarah thrived in the challenging environment. She worked 18-hour days, coordinating supply drops and managing inventory. When a sandstorm grounded all aircraft for 3 days, leaving the base dangerously low on water, Sarah organized water rationing that kept everyone alive until the storm passed. When a convoy carrying medical supplies was attacked and forced to turn back, Sarah volunteered to ride with the next convoy despite the obvious risks. Her fellow Marines began to look up to her. Corporal Johnson, a tough Marine from Detroit, had initially doubted whether someone as small as Sarah belonged in a combat zone. But after watching her work tirelessly to make sure everyone had what they needed, his opinion changed completely. "Martinez doesn't look like much," he told his buddy one evening as they watched Sarah checking inventory lists by flashlight. "But I'd follow her anywhere. She's got more courage in her little finger than most people have in their whole body." Sarah's reputation for reliability and courage spread throughout the base. When other units needed someone they could count on, they asked for Martinez. When dangerous missions required someone with steady nerves, commanders recommended Martinez. She never sought attention or recognition, but her dedication to duty was impossible to ignore. One particularly difficult day, Sarah received news that her grandfather had passed away. She was devastated. The old man who had inspired her to serve was gone, and she couldn't even attend his funeral. Her commanding officer offered to send her home on emergency leave, but Sarah declined. Her unit was preparing for a critical mission, and she refused to let them down. That night, Sarah sat alone under the desert stars, thinking about her grandfather's stories. She could almost hear his voice telling her about the Marines who had served before her, the ones who had sacrificed everything for their brothers and sisters in arms. She understood now what he had been trying to teach her all those years. Being a Marine wasn't about individual glory or recognition. It was about being part of something larger than yourself. The next morning, Sarah was back at her post, working with the same determination and focus that had made her legendary among her peers. She had learned that true courage wasn't the absence of fear or sadness. True courage was continuing to do your duty even when your heart was breaking. As her deployment continued, Sarah faced increasingly dangerous situations. Supply runs became more hazardous. Enemy activity increased. The base came under attack several times, with mortar and rockets landing dangerously close to the supply depot where Sarah worked. Through it all, she remained calm and focused, ensuring that Marines on the front lines never ran short of ammunition, food, or medical supplies. Sarah's story was just beginning. The young woman who had walked into that recruiting office with dreams of serving her country was about to face the ultimate test of her courage and dedication. But she had no way of knowing that her most challenging moment would also become her most inspiring, touching the hearts of 500 Marines and proving that heroism comes in all sizes. The morning started like any other at Forward Operating Base Thunder. Sarah woke up at 5:30, just as the desert sun began painting the mountains orange and pink. She pulled on her uniform, laced up her boots, and grabbed her rifle. The daily routine was always the same: morning formation, breakfast, then straight to work managing the endless flow of supplies that kept the base running. But today felt different somehow. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but there was tension in the air that hadn't been there the day before. During the morning briefing, Colonel Williams looked more serious than usual. Intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity in the area. All supply runs would need extra security escorts, and everyone needed to stay alert. Sarah's job that day was to oversee the arrival of a major supply convoy. 3 trucks loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, and food were scheduled to arrive by noon. It was a routine delivery, but with the heightened security concerns, nothing could be taken for granted. Sarah spent the morning double-checking inventory lists and coordinating with the security team that would escort the convoy to the base. Sergeant First Class Mike Thompson was leading the security detail. He was a veteran Marine with 3 deployments under his belt, and Sarah had worked with him many times before. They made a good team. Thompson handled the security aspects while Sarah managed the logistics, ensuring everything moved smoothly and efficiently. "Martinez, you sure you want to ride with us today?" Thompson asked as they prepared for the convoy escort mission. "With all the chatter about increased enemy activity, it might be safer for you to stay on base." Sarah shook her head firmly. "Those supplies are my responsibility, Sergeant. I'm not sending anyone to do a job I'm not willing to do myself." Thompson smiled. He had expected that answer. In the months they had worked together, he had never seen Sarah back down from a dangerous mission. Her courage had inspired his entire squad, and they respected her more than most officers they had served under. The convoy escort team consisted of 2 armored vehicles and 12 Marines. Sarah rode in the lead vehicle with Thompson and 4 other Marines. As they drove through the desert landscape, everyone remained alert, scanning the terrain for any signs of trouble. The route to the pickup point was relatively safe, but in Afghanistan, safety was always relative. The supply convoy was waiting at the designated meeting point right on schedule. 3 massive trucks loaded with critical supplies sat in the middle of nowhere, protected by their own security team. Sarah immediately got to work, checking paperwork and ensuring all the supplies matched what was ordered. Everything looked perfect. The return journey started without incident. Sarah's vehicle led the convoy back toward the base, followed by the 3 supply trucks and Thompson's rear security vehicle. The radio crackled with routine check-ins every few minutes. Everything was proceeding according to plan. They were just 5 miles from base when everything changed in an instant. The explosion was massive, lifting the lead vehicle completely off the ground and sending it tumbling down a small embankment. Sarah felt herself flying through the air, her world spinning in a confused blur of metal, dust, and noise. When the vehicle finally stopped rolling, everything went silent except for the ringing in her ears. Thompson was the first to regain consciousness. His head was bleeding and his left arm hung at an odd angle, but he was alive. He looked around frantically and saw that 2 of his Marines were unconscious but breathing. The driver was alert but trapped behind twisted metal. And then he saw Sarah. She was pinned under a piece of the vehicle's roof that had collapsed during the crash. Her eyes were closed and blood was trickling from her forehead. Thompson couldn't tell if she was breathing. Panic shot through him as he struggled to free himself from his seat. "Martinez! Sarah!" He called out, but she didn't respond. Thompson managed to crawl over to where Sarah was trapped. He checked for a pulse and found one, weak but steady. She was alive, but she was unconscious and badly injured. The piece of metal pinning her down was too heavy for him to lift alone, especially with his injured arm. The radio was damaged, but Thompson managed to get through to the base on his handheld unit. "Base, this is Eagle 1. We've hit an IED. Vehicle is destroyed. Multiple casualties. We need immediate medical evacuation. Martinez is trapped and unconscious." Within minutes, Thompson could hear helicopters approaching. The rest of the convoy had taken defensive positions around the crash site, and Marines were already working to secure the area. But Thompson's focus remained entirely on Sarah. She still hadn't regained consciousness, and he was worried about internal injuries. Captain Lisa Shun was the medical officer who rappelled down from the rescue helicopter. She was known throughout the Corps as one of the best battlefield medics anyone had ever seen. When she reached Sarah's position, she immediately began assessing her injuries while other Marines worked to lift the debris. "She's got a severe concussion and possible internal bleeding," Captain Chun announced. "We need to get her out of here now." It took 8 Marines working together to lift the piece of metal that had Sarah pinned. As soon as she was free, Captain Chun and her medical team went to work. They carefully moved Sarah onto a stretcher, stabilizing her neck and checking for spinal injuries. Throughout the entire process, Sarah remained unconscious, her face pale and peaceful despite the chaos around her. Thompson watched helplessly as they loaded Sarah into the helicopter. He had served with many brave Marines over the years, but he had never met anyone quite like her. The woman who had refused to stay behind, who had insisted on sharing the same risks as her fellow Marines, was now fighting for her life because of that same courage. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Sarah to the field hospital, Thompson made a silent promise. He would make sure everyone knew what had happened here. Sarah Martinez had been doing her duty, serving her fellow Marines when she was injured. She deserved to be remembered and honored for her sacrifice. The news of Sarah's injury spread quickly throughout the base and beyond. Word traveled from Marine to Marine, from unit to unit, from base to base. The young woman who had always put others first, who had never asked for recognition or praise, had become a symbol of everything the Marine Corps stood for. The field hospital at Bagram Air Base was a world of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency between beds filled with wounded soldiers and Marines. The steady beeping of medical equipment mixed with the distant sound of helicopters bringing in more casualties. In the middle of this environment, Sarah Martinez lay unconscious in bed 7. Surrounded by machines monitoring every aspect of her condition. Dr. Amanda Foster had been working in military hospitals for 15 years, but she had never seen injuries quite like Sarah's. The explosion had caused severe trauma to her brain, resulting in a coma that showed no signs of lifting. Her body had also suffered multiple fractures and internal injuries that required immediate surgery. What amazed Dr. Foster was how someone so small could have survived such massive trauma. "She's a fighter," Dr. Foster told Colonel Williams when he arrived to check on Sarah's condition. "Most people wouldn't have survived the initial impact, but somehow she did. Her vital signs are stable, but the brain injury is severe. We're doing everything we can, but now it's up to her to wake up." Colonel Williams stood beside Sarah's bed, looking down at the young Marine who had become legendary throughout his command. He had read her service record multiple times, but seeing her lying there so small and still, it was hard to believe this was the same person who had volunteered for every dangerous mission and never complained about the hardships of deployment. News of Sarah's condition spread far beyond Afghanistan. Her story reached Marine bases around the world through the informal network of communication that connected Marines everywhere. At Camp Pendleton, where Sarah had been stationed before deployment, Marines who had served with her gathered to share stories about her courage and dedication. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah's old drill instructor from Paris Island, heard about her injury during a phone call from a former colleague. The news hit him harder than he expected. He remembered the determined young woman who had walked into his training company years ago, and he felt a personal connection to her struggle. "That kid always had more heart than anyone twice her size," Rodriguez told his wife that evening. "If anyone can pull through this, it's Martinez. She's too stubborn to give up." At the hospital in Bagram, Sarah's condition remained unchanged for days. The medical staff continued their around-the-clock care, but there was little they could do except wait and hope. Brain injuries were unpredictable. Some patients woke up after a few days as if nothing had happened. Others never woke up at all. Captain Chun, the medical officer who had treated Sarah at the crash site, visited her every day. She felt a special responsibility for Sarah's care because she had been the first medical professional to treat her injuries. Chun had seen many Marines injured in combat, but there was something about Sarah that affected her differently. During one of her visits, Chun noticed something unusual. Sarah's hand had moved slightly when Chun was adjusting her blanket. It was barely noticeable, just a small twitch of her fingers, but it was the first sign of movement Sarah had shown since the explosion. Chun immediately called for Dr. Foster. "It could just be an involuntary muscle spasm," Dr. Foster explained after examining Sarah carefully. "But it could also indicate that she's starting to regain some neurological function. We need to keep monitoring her closely." Meanwhile, back at Forward Operating Base Thunder, Sarah's absence was felt by everyone. The supply operations continued, but they lacked the smooth efficiency that Sarah had brought to every task. Marines who had worked with her found themselves asking, what would Martinez do? When faced with difficult logistics problems, Sergeant Thompson, who had been in the vehicle with Sarah when the ID exploded, blamed himself for her injuries. His own wounds had healed quickly, but the emotional trauma of seeing Sarah so badly hurt continued to haunt him. He threw himself into his work, volunteering for extra missions and pushing himself harder than ever before. "It should have been me," Thompson told his squad leader one evening. "Martinez was only there because she insisted on doing her job. She could have stayed safe on base, but she chose to come with us. Now she's fighting for her life because of that choice." His squad leader, a wise old Marine named Gunny Patterson, listened patiently before responding. "Thompson, you know Martinez better than that. If she could hear you right now, she'd probably chew you out for feeling sorry for yourself. She made her choice because she's a Marine, just like you. Honor that choice by continuing to do your job the way she would want you to." Stories about Sarah began circulating throughout the Marine Corps community. Marines who had never met her personally heard about the small woman, who had volunteered for dangerous missions and always put her fellow Marines first. Her story became a source of inspiration for Marines facing their own challenges and fears. At Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, drill instructors began telling new recruits about Sarah Martinez when they taught lessons about courage and dedication. Her example showed that being a Marine wasn't about size or strength, but about character and commitment. Back at the hospital, Sarah's medical team continued to monitor her progress closely. The small movements in her hand became more frequent, and her brain scans showed subtle improvements. Dr. Foster remained cautiously optimistic, but she knew that even if Sarah woke up, the road to recovery would be long and difficult. "Brain injuries are complicated," Dr. Foster explained to Colonel Williams during one of his visits. "Even if she regains consciousness, she might face significant challenges. Memory loss, difficulty speaking, problems with coordination. We just have to wait and see." As Sarah's story spread throughout the Marine Corps, something unprecedented began to happen. Marines at bases around the world started planning something special, something that had never been done before. They wanted to show Sarah, when she woke up, how much her service and sacrifice meant to the entire Marine Corps family. The plan was ambitious and would require coordination between multiple bases and hundreds of Marines. But if there was one thing Marines excelled at, it was taking care of their own. Sarah Martinez had spent her entire Marine Corps career taking care of others. Now it was time for her fellow Marines to take care of her. 3 weeks had passed since the explosion that changed everything. Sarah lay in the hospital bed surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment, while across the world an extraordinary plan was taking shape. What started as individual Marines, sharing Sarah's story had grown into something much larger, something that would demonstrate the true meaning of brotherhood in the Marine Corps. Major General Robert Hayes sat in his office at Marine Corps Base Quantico, reading the latest reports about Sarah's condition. As a senior officer, he had seen many Marines wounded in combat, but Sarah's story had affected him deeply. The reports he was receiving weren't just medical updates. They were descriptions of how one young Marine's courage had inspired an entire community. "Sir, we have a situation that requires your attention," his aide, Captain Morrison, said as he entered the office with a thick folder. "It's about Lance Corporal Martinez." General Hayes looked up with concern. "Is her condition getting worse?" "No, sir, it's not that. Her condition is actually improving slowly. The situation I'm referring to is what's happening in response to her injury. Marines from over 50 different bases have been contacting us about organizing something unprecedented." Captain Morrison opened the folder and spread out papers across the general's desk. There were letters, emails, and formal requests from Marine units around the world. All of them wanted to participate in honoring Sarah when she recovered enough to return to duty. The plan that had emerged was simple but powerful. When Sarah was well enough to attend a ceremony, Marines wanted to organize the largest salute in Marine Corps history. Not just a few dozen Marines, but hundreds of them, all standing at attention, to honor one of their own who had embodied the best values of their service. "This is remarkable," General Hayes said as he read through the requests. Marines from bases in Japan, California, North Carolina, and even some who are deployed overseas want to participate. How many Marines are we talking about? Based on the responses we've received, sir, approximately 500 Marines have volunteered to participate. They're willing to use their own leave time and pay their own travel expenses to be there for Lance Corporal Martinez. General Hayes leaned back in his chair, amazed by what he was hearing. In his 30 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. Individual acts of heroism were common in the Marine Corps, but this level of coordinated response to honor one Marine was unprecedented. Meanwhile, at the hospital in Germany where Sarah had been transferred for specialized care, small signs of progress continued to appear. Dr. Elena Richter, the neurologist overseeing Sarah's treatment, had noticed more frequent periods of brain activity that suggested Sarah might be closer to regaining consciousness. "Her responses to stimuli are becoming more consistent, Doctor," Richter explained to Sarah's parents who had flown in from Texas. "We're still being very cautious, but the signs are encouraging. She's fighting to come back to us." Sarah's mother, Maria Martinez, sat beside her daughter's bed for hours every day, talking to her about family news, memories from childhood, and messages of support that had been pouring in from Marines around the world. Maria had never fully understood her daughter's dedication to military service, but seeing the response from Sarah's fellow Marines had helped her realize how special her daughter truly was. "Mia, you have so many people praying for you," Maria whispered to her unconscious daughter. "Marines you've never even met are planning something special for when you wake up. They all know how brave you are, how much you care about others. Now you need to be brave for yourself and come back to us." At Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, in North Carolina, Gunnery Sergeant Williams was coordinating the East Coast participation in what had become known as Operation Martinez. He had served with Sarah during her first deployment and had personally witnessed her courage and dedication. Now he was working 18-hour days to ensure that every detail of the planned ceremony would be perfect. Martinez always made sure. Everything was perfect for us, Gunny Williams told his staff. Now it's our turn to make sure everything is perfect for her. This ceremony needs to show her how much her service means to every single one of us. The logistics of coordinating 500 Marines from dozens of different bases was incredibly complex. Travel arrangements had to be made, schedules coordinated, and ceremony details planned down to the smallest element. But Marines approached the challenge with the same precision and dedication they brought to combat missions. At Marine Corps' Air Station Miramar in California, Sergeant Major Johnson was working with Marine Corps leadership to secure official approval for the ceremony. What had started as a grassroots effort by individual Marines now had the attention of the highest levels of Marine Corps command. "This isn't just about honoring one Marine," Sergeant Major Johnson explained to his commanding officer. "This is about showing the world what the Marine Corps stands for. Martinez represents everything we try to instill in our Marines: courage, honor, commitment, and selfless service." Word of the planned ceremony eventually reached the medical team caring for Sarah, Captain Chun, who had been following Sarah's progress closely, was amazed by what she learned about the response to Sarah's injury. "Doctor, you need to understand something," Captain Chun told Dr. Richter. "This isn't just any Marine lying in that bed. This is someone who has inspired hundreds of people she's never even met. When she wakes up, she's going to discover that her courage has touched lives around the world." As Sarah's condition continued to improve gradually, her medical team began preparing for the possibility that she might regain consciousness soon. Her brain scans showed increasing activity, and she had begun responding to simple commands like squeezing someone's hand when asked. Dr. Richter was cautiously optimistic, but wanted to prepare Sarah's family for the reality of what recovery might look like. Even when she wakes up, she'll likely be confused and disoriented for some time. Her memory might be affected and she need extensive rehabilitation. But the fact that she's made it this far suggests she has the strength to continue fighting. Back at Quantico, General Hayes made the decision that would make history. He officially authorized the ceremony and designated it as a formal Marine Corps event. Resources would be provided to ensure that Marines from around the world could participate in honoring their fellow Marine. Lance Corporal Martinez represents the very best of what it means to be a Marine, General Hayes announced in his official authorization. This ceremony will demonstrate to her and to the world that the Marine Corps never forgets those who serve with honor and courage. The wheels were now in motion for something unprecedented in Marine Corps history. 500 Marines would gather to salute one of their own, showing that individual acts of courage and selflessness create ripples that touch countless lives. But first, Sarah needed to wake up and begin the long journey of recovery that would eventually lead her to that moment of recognition. The moment Sarah's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 6 weeks, the world seemed different. The bright hospital lights hurt her eyes, and the sounds around her seemed muffled and strange. She tried to speak but found that her throat was too dry to make any sound. Confusion washed over her as she struggled to remember where she was and what had happened. Dr. Richter was at Sarah's bedside within minutes of being called by the nurse. She had been waiting for this moment, but she knew that Sarah's awakening was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. "Sarah, can you hear me?" "I'm Dr. Richter. You're in a hospital in Germany. You were injured, but you're safe now," the doctor said gently. Speaking slowly and clearly, Sarah's eyes moved toward the sound of the voice, but her expression remained confused. She tried to sit up but found that her body wouldn't respond the way she expected. Panic began to set in as she realized something was seriously wrong. "Sarah, you need to stay calm. You've been unconscious for several weeks due to a brain injury. Your body is going to feel weak for a while, but that's normal. We're going to help you get better," Dr. Richter explained. Over the next few days, Sarah's memories began to return in fragments. She remembered being in Afghanistan. She remembered the convoy and riding with Sergeant Thompson. But everything after that was a blank space that frightened her. The doctors explained about the explosion and her injuries, but it felt like they were talking about someone else. Sarah's parents were overjoyed to see their daughter awake, but they were also worried about the challenges she faced. Sarah had trouble speaking clearly, her coordination was poor, and she became frustrated easily when her body wouldn't do what her mind wanted it to do. "Mia, you're going to get better," her mother said, holding Sarah's hand. "You're the strongest person I know. You've already survived the worst part." Physical therapy began immediately. Sarah worked with specialists who helped her relearn basic movements and coordination. The simple act of walking across a room became a major accomplishment. Sarah's determination, the same quality that had made her an exceptional Marine, now drove her recovery. Lieutenant Lisa Park, a Marine Corps liaison officer, visited Sarah regularly to keep her updated on how her fellow Marines were doing and to help coordinate her eventual return to the United States. During one visit, she brought news that amazed Sarah. "Sarah, I need to tell you about something that's been happening while you've been recovering," Lieutenant Park said. "Your story has spread throughout the Marine Corps, and Marines around the world have been inspired by your service and sacrifice." Sarah listened in disbelief as Lieutenant Park described the response to her injury. The idea that hundreds of Marines she had never met knew her story seemed impossible to believe. "Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake," Sarah said, her speech still slightly slurred from her brain injury. "I didn't do anything special. I was just doing my job." "Sarah, that's exactly why your story is so powerful. You never thought of your service as anything special, but your fellow Marines recognize the courage and dedication you showed every single day." As Sarah's recovery progressed, she learned more about the ceremony being planned in her honor. The idea that 500 Marines wanted to salute her seemed overwhelming and embarrassing. She had always been uncomfortable with attention and recognition. "I don't deserve this," Sarah told Dr. Richter during one of her therapy sessions. "There are Marines who have done much more than I have. Marines who have given their lives for their fellow Marines. Why are they focusing on me?" Dr. Richter had worked with many military patients and understood Sarah's feelings. "Sarah, sometimes people need heroes they can see and touch. Your fellow Marines see in you the qualities they admire most about military service. By honoring you, they're honoring those values." After 3 months in the German hospital, Sarah was finally cleared to return to the United States. The flight home was emotional and difficult. She was excited to be going back to American soil, but she was also nervous about the attention her story had generated. Sarah was transferred to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center near Washington, D.C., where she would continue her rehabilitation. The doctors there were amazed by the progress she had already made, but they also made it clear that her recovery would continue for many more months. Captain Morrison, General Hayes's aide, visited Sarah at Walter Reed to discuss the ceremony that was being planned. By this time, the event had grown beyond anything originally imagined. Media outlets had learned about the story and wanted to cover the ceremony. Military officials saw it as an opportunity to showcase the values of the Marine Corps. "Sarah, we understand if you're not comfortable with all the attention," Captain Morrison said, "but I want you to understand what this means to your fellow Marines. They're not just honoring you personally. They're honoring the idea that every Marine matters, that individual acts of courage and dedication are noticed and valued." Sarah struggled with conflicted emotions. Part of her wanted to hide from the attention and quietly continue her recovery, but another part of her understood that this was bigger than her personal comfort. If her story could inspire other young people to serve their country or help other Marines feel valued for their service, then maybe the attention was worthwhile. As the date for the ceremony approached, Sarah worked harder than ever on her physical therapy. She was determined to walk across that field under her own power, even if she needed assistance. Her speech had improved dramatically, and while she still struggled with some coordination issues, her doctors were amazed by her progress. The night before the ceremony, Sarah lay in her hospital bed thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her grandfather and the stories he had told her about service and sacrifice. She thought about her fellow Marines who were planning to honor her the next day. Most of all, she thought about the responsibility she now carried to live up to the example others saw in her. Sarah had always been humble about her service, but she was beginning to understand that her story had become larger than her individual experience. 500 Marines were coming to salute not just her, but the values she represented. Tomorrow she would stand before them and accept their recognition, not for herself, but for every Marine who served with courage and dedication in circumstances far from home.